Speaking of turning heads, I'd like to call the House Finance Ways and Means Appropriations Subcommittee to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Representatives Campbell, Faison, Garrett, Hazelwood, Hicks of Hawkins, Lamar, Miller, Sexton and Granger, Shaw, Sparks, Zachary, Chairman Williams. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Clerk, thank you members for being here today. Today's subject matter for Appropriations Committee has to do with capital projects. Obviously, the two largest areas in which we saw the governor's budget include capital projects, includes higher education, as well as those projects for general services. I've asked them to come here today to give us a presentation as it relates to capital and capital maintenance. First up today, we have Dr. House. Good to see you. I will say she knew she was coming here on Monday. She showed up in my district. So every other director or commissioner should know that they should just show up in the district before. No, I'm just kidding. She was there having some Ralph's Donuts. But without objection, we're going to go out of session and hear from T-Heck. Dr. House, you are recognized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, good afternoon. Emily House, Executive Director of Tennessee Higher Education Commission. I'm joined by a number of commission staff. I have Stephen Gentile, our Chief Policy Officer with me, Paul Marshall, our Chief of Facilities, and Patty Miller, our Chief Architect, as well as Lou Hanneman, who you all know very well. Happy to be here today to talk a little bit about capital outlay and maintenance, particularly about capital outlay, but a little bit about maintenance as well. Just for the sake of absolute clarity, what these two terms mean when we're talking about higher education capital is listed here on this slide. When we're talking about outlay, we're talking about new construction or a major renovation to a building. Anything else would be classified for the most part under maintenance. Any kind of repair to a system, like an HVAC system, any kind of accessibility would be under the maintenance category. So for the most part today, I'll focus my remarks on outlay, though I'm happy to talk about maintenance as well. A little bit of historical context for the committee. Prior to the Focus Act in 2016, public higher education was divided into two systems, the University of Tennessee system and the Tennessee Board of Regents. Because there were two systems, each system would provide to THEC a list. We would merge those lists, and each year projects would move up the list year over year. There was very little opportunity to pull something off or put something back on. It was sort of a survival of the fittest as you moved up the list. When the THEC staff did it that way prior to the Focus Act, there was a balance always prioritized by Grand Division. There was a balance by system. So TBR and UT, there was an attempt to balance as well as geographically across the state. Also, just this may be relevant as we go on, priority was often placed on renovation during that process as well. Post the Focus Act passed in 2016. 2017 was the first time we did the new process. So this current year is our fourth time doing this new process. It is a competitive process year over year, the same way one would do a grant competition. So the institutions and the systems submit proposals to THEC. They are read and scored blindly by a group of THEC staff. And that is how we put the list together. The list resets each year. And it's important to note that in 2016, 2017, we pulled together a capital task force with representatives from the institutions across the state to really make sure everyone was aware of and comfortable with what this new process would be. This is not something THEC did in a vacuum 4 years ago. This is something that we got a lot of feedback on and what we've been doing ever since. So I know many of you should have received not only a copy of the slide deck, but a copy of the process, just narrative, what we go through each year, as well as a copy of the instructions. If you've had an opportunity to look through the instructions and the rubric that are presented to the campuses each year, it's pretty thick, it's pretty robust, and it's pretty clear. At least from our perspective, it's pretty clear. So I want to talk through that just a little bit from a process perspective. So as I mentioned a second ago, the projects are initiated by the campuses and the system. So each campus will come to their system, or if it's a locally governed institution, they will just have their own project, and those are submitted to THEC. Each locally governed institution can submit one. The University of Tennessee system submits 3, and the Tennessee Board of Regents submits 3 each year. To speak a little bit to the packet that you all received, before submission of the projects, the institutions do receive the instructions, the rubric, and Patty and Paul, who are behind me, spend a lot of time on the phone via webinar talking through with CFOs, with the facilities staff at each campus, what the parameters are and answering any questions that they have. A note as well, as it relates to banding, this is relevant only to the systems because the systems submit more than one project. THEC defers to the system's priorities as it relates to their capital projects. By that, I mean they can band the order of their 3 projects, or they can defer to THEC that wherever things land on the list is where they land. So by that, I mean if a system submits 3 projects, prioritized 1, 2, 3, the scoring process results in a 2, 1, 3 scoring. That item 2 would go behind project 1. Project 2 would go behind project 1 because we honor the preferences and the priorities of the systems. So that's just an important note for context about this. The rubric that you have in front of you demonstrates the assessment of the projects. The projects are assessed on 4 categories. First and foremost, and first in the front of each document, is alignment with the state's attainment goal, as well as state goals more broadly. We've talked so much about CTE, career and workforce readiness. That would be an example of one of Governor Lee's priorities, as well as the Drive to 55, the state's attainment goal. So first and foremost, the projects are assessed on that. Further, they are assessed on alignment with the campus master plan and campus strategic plan. So it is not the case, even though the intent of this new process is to introduce a little bit of flexibility. It's not just projects moving up a list over time. The project cannot just be something that a campus thinks of today. It needs to reflect the strategic priorities and the master plan from a facilities perspective on each campus. Also, project description, the impact on the campus, what will this actually do to where courses are offered, how students are moving across the campus, what is the project itself, and how will it impact the campus, as well as a detailed space analysis. How does this actually facilitate whatever the needs are on the campus? Any kind of match that is not state funds will be disclosed. That is not true for TCATs, and that is not true. A gift disclosure is not necessary for a renovation. That's that little asterisk there. So where applicable, any external funding is taken into account as well, but that is not universally applicable. So the THEC staff receives these proposals usually in early fall. We do the blind scoring process that I mentioned before. The list comes together. We bring the list to our THEC commission at their fall meeting, which typically occurs in early to mid-November. So at that meeting, Patty or Stephen or another member of our staff will present those projects to the commission. They will vote on that slate of projects. And at that time, the projects are submitted to FNA, to the FNA commissioner. At that point, THEC's statutory charge is fulfilled. So statutorily, once we submit to FNA for inclusion in the proposed budget the following spring, that is where our statutory authority and statutory charge ends, just for another note about process there. So this past November, our commission approved a list of 12 projects for submission to FNA. You can see those projects there. They reflect the LGIs, the community colleges, the TCATs, as well as the UT system, for a total of $480 million. From our perspective, all of these projects are fundable. So THEC would not have included on this list any project that we did not think was fundable. All 12 of these projects are fundable, to be very clear, from our perspective and the perspective of our raters and our readers. The rank, just to be clear about the rankings reflect those dimensions that I mentioned a few slides back. Alignment with state goals, alignment with the attainment goal, alignment with campus strategic plans. What is the actual project and what is the actual footprint? So this ranking of 1 to 12 reflects how closely these projects align to the rubric, align to those dimensions, as well as just the completeness of the questions and alignment with everything I just mentioned. So these are the 12 that were submitted by the THEC Commission, approved by the THEC Commission in November of 2020, submitted to FNA. The 6 projects at the top were included in the governor's proposed budget. So when the budget came out about a month ago, these were the 6 projects included: Tennessee Tech, Austin P, MTSU, Columbia State in the Williamson County campus, Knoxville, and the UT Health Science Center. As to why these 6 were chosen from the 12, I would defer to Commissioner Ely and the administration. But as I said, as far as THEC is concerned, all 12 are fundable. These are the 6 that were chosen for inclusion in the proposed budget. I haven't said much about maintenance recently, but we have a lot of need on campuses to maintain what we have built in the past. So the proposed budget also includes about $150 million for maintenance projects. And you can see the distribution of what that would look like campus by system, considering the LGI as a system. So just a note about 2 phenomena that often take place and have taken place both under the old process and the new process since the Focus Act. The first is that of planning funds. It has been the case in some prior years that a project receives planning funds, though they are not included in the list of funded projects. Receiving planning funds does not necessarily guarantee by any means a spot on the list the next year. That is not implied nor expressed. However, if projects improve and the planning monies are used to improve the project, it may improve the chances as well. But nowhere does it say if you get the planning funds, you'll be on the list next year, nor does anybody say that. Further, some conversation about skipped projects. Since 2017, when we put together this new process in collaboration with the campuses, the list has only been followed top to bottom 1 of those 4 times. So there is a precedent for the administration as well as the General Assembly skipping around the list based on what priorities they deem to be the highest. So just to make clear that there has been instances in the past, there have been instances where planning funds are awarded as well as skipping around the list. So moving forward, when I was in front of the full committee a few weeks ago, I spoke a little bit about this. What we are doing in the immediate term is engaging with 2 national experts in this field, the DLR Group and SCUP. DLR Group is a research and planning firm out of the Midwest. They are an architectural firm that has a large research arm. The state of Tennessee participated in this research related to responses to COVID, what do footprints need to look like, what is the role of online ed, and because the state participated in this research, we have access to the information that they collected in the reports that they put together related to other states, which has been a tremendous resource as Patty and Paul primarily have facilitated these discussions with our campuses about what's going on nationally. Further, the Society for College and University Planning, SCUP, is a very, very highly renowned trade group, for lack of a better word, in this space. They will be coming to Tennessee virtually the end of April to work with our campus representatives to talk about the intersections of academics and facilities and how strategic planning can kind of be integrated in that way, particularly given the second point here. What do we know about online learning, best practices learned from COVID? And how can the academic side of the house talk to the facilities side of the house in a way that maximizes student experience as well as efficiencies on campus? So SCUP will be very, very helpful in that regard. Just spoke to this a second ago. As we think about what we've learned this past 12 months about online learning, how does that relate to the conversation about facilities? I think any conversation that centers around like, well, why do we need buildings anymore is a little bit of an overcorrection. To say that perhaps we don't need any buildings, I think that's very much an overcorrection. However, I think there are important conversations to have about what that needs to look like from an efficiency standpoint, and what types of facilities are the most useful given what we have learned about online learning. And finally, from the state perspective, from the THEC perspective, in addition to the update to our agency master plan and the long-range financial plan that Dr. Gentile and his colleagues put together, we are thinking through a long-range capital plan, acknowledging that the list and the process reset each year. What do the objectives need to be statewide in terms of this discussion about capital, especially now, given everything that we have learned? So this is a very long conversation. We have covered a lot of ground just in the month or so since I was in front of the full committee, but this will continue to be a long, deep conversation that THEC continues to be happy to lead, and it's been fascinating to do that. But this is a much longer term conversation. So in that regard, the plan for this coming year is to focus only on renovations and demolition when we think about the capital outlay process. So rather than breaking ground on new buildings, we will solicit from the campuses proposals related to major renovation and demolition. Acknowledging the importance of the discussion around COVID and around online learning, the proposals will be expected to include some mention of that as well as a formal evaluation of space need to that third bullet point there. Space need, what common spaces need to look like, what offices need to look like for faculty and staff, et cetera. And continuing the discussion about maintenance, we have about $500 million in deferred maintenance over the next 5 years. If you go out 10 years, that's about $1 billion. If you go out 20 years, that's $2 to $3 billion in deferred maintenance. So really keeping our finger on the pulse of what needs to be maintained and repaired on campuses, in addition to renovated or demoed. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions from you and from your colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. House. I really appreciate that. I had two quick questions just for clarity. The $153 million for capital maintenance, it says some of that money we're using reoccurring funds. This is the same reoccurring funds we've been funding for capital maintenance over the last several years, correct?
I believe that is true. Yes, sir.
And the $103.3 million of non-reoccurring for capital funding for capital maintenance, this is just where we had extra money and we decided to distribute here to help catch up on
Yes,
this
sir.
$2 billion of
Immense
unfunded.
backlog.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Next on the list, I have Chairman Zachary. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. House, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
It's encouraging to hear all the work that you guys have done over the last month. So thank you for the thorough report. And it's good to see you so close after that first time you were with us to be able to see the
Thank you.
progress that's been made. Quick question related to some notably large capital projects that are to be funded, the school bonds and institutional funding sources. We've got the $63.2 million for the new student housing, $66 million for the athletic center at MTSU, the $29.5 million for Residence Hall, and $56 million for Tennessee Tech. Can you explain to the committee the school bond project review process and then what role THEC plays in that?
Sure. So I would actually ask Stephen or Patty to come up to speak to that in more detail. Those projects that you mentioned are out of the scope of what THEC would work very closely to include in a process like this. Anything related to residence halls or athletics is outside of this process. So I would be speaking very much out of turn to speak to that in any detail. But I'll ask Dr. Gentile, with your permission, Mr. Chair, to speak to that.
Yes, just state your name for the record as well, please.
Good afternoon, Stephen Gentile, Chief Policy Officer of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. Sir, we do review all institutionally funded projects, disclosed projects that come our way. We disclose them to the administration, to the General Assembly quarterly. And those that are funded specifically by TSSBA bond funds, we do review in the concept of the ability for this project to be paid down with the fees presented in them. But we do not say whether or not a project is in alignment with the strategic financial plan or the state goals themselves. That is held to the capital outlay review process for state funding directly.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, I'm assuming that most renovation projects, because you're saying that next year we're going to focus on renovation projects instead of new capital buildings like we're doing this year. If we're doing that, most of the projects we bond this way, are they new projects or are they renovation projects?
They're mostly new, right? I'll ask Dr. Gentile to
Okay.
speak to that.
Sir, in regards to the renovation projects that are funded by state appropriations themselves, they could be a blend of renovation or new capital projects. The TSSBA bonded funds, those are also a blend of renovation or construction, but funded ultimately by student fees or parking, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Just as a follow-on to something else you said, Dr. Howes, I think it's really important. We looked at enrollment growth in institutions of higher learning, and I think it was no coincidence that those institutions who had some form of in-person learning had a better rate of enrollment increase, it seemed to me as though. And so I think you're correct in saying that an overcorrection because of COVID may be in order. I think I know this is hard to believe, but as someone who has a student at one of our institutions of higher learning, it is amazing to see how different the culture is really on campus just from a year later. So I think it's important that we do say that.
Oh, yes, sir. And I think that's true. I mean, enrollment across the board declined, particularly in our two-year institutions. But for the most part, any increase in enrollment that we saw was in the graduate space. But your point is well made, sir, that the experience is quite different for a student of any level, in person versus hybrid versus totally online. Yes, sir.
Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director House. It's certainly good to see you back. I hate to go back and to, I guess, continue just harping on this, but so I just totally don't understand the priority list. I still don't understand. Well, let me ask you this. How long does it take you all, once the list has been sent over and those projects have been funded, and then I'm assuming you guys start pretty much immediately to compile the list for the following year? Would you say it was it's a year-long process? How long does that take?
I would, sir. So typically we send out the instructions around this time of year. We receive the proposals back from the institutions in the summer or early fall. We read and review them toward the middle of the fall, and it's in November that our board approves the slate, and then the process starts again pretty quickly following the holidays. To hear Patty and Paul tell it, the institutions would prefer that this were to start on January 1st, that they get the instructions. But we do the best we can. But to your question, sir, it is a year-long process. Yes, sir.
Has the proposed list that, since you all submitted, I think this new process began back in 2017.
Yes,
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So since 2017, has the list ever been followed verbatim for what you all have put out there?
It's been followed one time,
So
sir.
one time
Yes,
since
sir.
2017. So a process that takes a year long with all the work and the due diligence that you and your staff put into that. And then we have a hard time still following that list with all the work. It just confuses me. And total transparency, back in my neck of the woods, ETSU is there. And ETSU since 2017, I think, is the only university that has had a project on that list since 2017. And still yet this year, we find it outside, we find it outside of what's being funded.
Yes, sir.
And so I guess my frustration is if we're going to charge you all with coming up with a list and doing the due diligence on it, that I think we should really look at making sure that we follow the list. I just think it makes so much sense to me that I'm confused at why we don't.
Yep. Yes, sir. So thank you for that feedback. And the THEC staff would say, and I would say, that all 12 of these projects are fundable. I would have to defer to F&A as to why they chose to skip around the way they did. But from our perspective, the ETSU project and all the other 11 on this list are fundable. I would defer to Commissioner Ely and his team for why they made the choices they made.
So has there been any, since they do jump around, except for one time, has there been any conversation, maybe going back and looking at kind of how you all prioritize who's on that list? Has there been any communication there? Maybe going with the administration and, looking at, well, what are they looking at when they prioritize, and maybe getting together so
Sure.
that, because I just hate seeing these universities and that have put all this work in to getting on the list, doing everything that's required. And then and I understand that priorities change. I understand administrations change. I understand people change. But my goodness, well, for what, it just seems like there's a lot of hard work and we don't follow it. And so I guess that's my question. Are you guys looking at maybe changing the process so that we can have just a little more consistency of who's going to be funded?
So I can't speak for my predecessor. I can only speak for myself. I have not engaged in any conversations about process with the administration. I think we could have those conversations. I think it's worth noting that THEC prioritizes this list because way back when THEC was chartered as an agency, we were in 1967, we were charged with mitigating duplication and having our finger on the pulse of the footprint. So that, I think, even from 50 plus years ago, is really why we choose to prioritize the list. In terms of different strategies, in terms of could there be a different process? Absolutely. We can absolutely talk to the administration, and I would welcome any feedback from the General Assembly. But we prioritize the list as we have based on that rubric and the instructions, just with an eye to equity, minimizing duplication, and just kind of keeping our eye on the footprint. But your comment is well received, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the hard work that you and your staff are doing.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but a follow-up to that, and then I think we're going to be Just to follow up to that real quick. If those 12 projects, you say they're all fundable, I'm assuming your definition of fundable means they have the local money on hand in order to do that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So whatever match funds would be required are included. So yes. Oftentimes this reflects local buy-in, local collaboration, local partnerships as appropriate. Some of these are more shovel-ready than others, but they are all shovel-ready enough that the THEC staff is comfortable, and I, as the THEC leader, THEC leadership, as well as the THEC commission itself, are comfortable with all of these being fundable.
Based upon your previous testimony, you said that we're going to concentrate on alterations or renovations. So in the case of the other 6 projects on this list that were not funded, they won't be funded next year?
Patty, which are these? Are any of these renovations?
They are, dealing with the renovations, the innovation park.
So with the exception of UT Martin, sir, the rest would be ineligible next year. The Nashville. Yeah, so all but one, sir, would not be eligible next year.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Patty, from the back row.
Yeah,
That was
Patty from the back
Miller.
row. Patty Miller, Chief Architect.
Yes. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, your question was my question. I wanted to understand fundable. And you mentioned that on this list, number 11, for example, my neck of the woods, University of Memphis, how long has this request been in the rankings?
So the list resets each year. So this was submitted this year to this particular list.
I think the University of Memphis, although it's reset each year, they've been talking about this for a lot longer than 1 year.
Yep, that's a new project this year.
Oh,
sir.
this is a new project?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yes, sir.
But it's, okay, each year there's a new. Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
And if a project is not funded in a prior year, the institution can work to improve the proposal and then resubmit the following year. This happens to be a new project from Memphis.
Totally
To
new.
Chairman Williams' point, though, because next year we're planning to do renovations and demolition only, 5 of these 6 unfunded projects would not meet those criteria.
Thank you. Thank you,
sir.
Mr.
And in full disclosure there, Representative Miller, University of Memphis was 6th or 7th on the list last year, and I think they were funded. So last year for the new engineering building. Yep. So Dr. House and team, thank you guys for coming here.
Thank you,
Appreciate your quick overview and your willingness to be here, but thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it
Thank you
very
much, sir. Thank you, members.
Since we didn't use the other side and we're always limited on time, we have up next general services. If you'll come forward, we would love to have you, Commissioner Branscombe and Deputy Commissioner Hull. You guys are going to be testifying today, and we are still out of session. As discussed, members, they're here to talk about the general services, their oversight as it relates to the other capital projects that compromise a large portion of our budget. And so with that being said, Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, you are recognized for your presentation. I will say, I hate that you're having to listen to your own voices on Representative Miller's laptop over here, or his iPad, but I think he's got it fixed now. If LIS could send someone down here to catch his volume, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you. Chairman Williams, distinguished members of the committee, I'm Christy Branscombe, Commissioner for the Department of General Services. I have Deputy Commissioner Mr. John Hull with me today, and he is the Director for the State of Tennessee Real Estate Asset Management Group, which we also call STREAM. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to review our capital budget request for our department. We've had some great things going on in real property, and if you don't know, we're being recognized across the country for some of the innovative practices that we have in our real estate division. For those of you not familiar with general services, I'll give you a quick rundown of what we do. We work daily to support our sister agencies in delivering their missions to the people of Tennessee. We have 4 external service divisions. Central Procurement Office is responsible for the procurement of all goods and contracting of services in state government. The Governor's Office of Diversity Business is also a part of this office. They call it the GO-DBE office. And this past year, we spent almost $740 million with diverse business enterprises in our state, and that is an 11% increase over the previous year. So very proud of the work in that group. Our State of Tennessee Real Estate Asset Management Group, or STREAM, which is where most of our discussion will be focused today, operates, manages, and maintains general government real estate assets. It's responsible for providing a comfortable, safe, and secure working environment for our staff, and also for managing our general government capital improvement and capital maintenance projects. Our Vehicle and Asset Management Division is responsible for the state's motor vehicle fleet, including all motorized equipment from lawnmowers to tractors to cars and to heavy trucks. We're also responsible for the distribution of the state of Tennessee surplus property and federal surplus property within Tennessee. Our Document Solutions Division provides a wide variety of printing, graphic, scanning, photographic, videography services for all branches of government. We also have a distribution service where we keep items that many departments may need in bulk, and we process incoming and outgoing mail. And we have a variety of smaller internal service offices that support the work of our division or our department. So let's start with the capital project, our capital budget. Before we do that, however, we probably ought to set the stage to help you guys understand the Tennessee real estate portfolio. Just to be clear, we have about 97 million square feet of general government real estate. It's almost 100 million square feet. So for us in general government, what we have is 34 million square feet, or slightly over a third. If you look at the chart on the left, you can see general government has 34 million square feet, which is 35% of the real estate portfolio. The other two colors there represent properties that are all higher education. So 2/3 of that belongs to the higher education institutes. Within general government, our General Services Real Estate Division, or STREAM, we have about 6.5 million square feet of owned property and about 3.3 million square feet of leased property. So that's slightly less than the third of all general government properties. And the other 2/3 you see there, I guess it's a lighter pink on that right side, is actually owned or leased by other state government agencies. Probably also a good time to talk about quickly what Facilities Revolving Fund is, or FERF. Many of you are very familiar with this term. Some may not be as familiar. But it was established in 1988 for the efficient and effective management of general government's office and warehousing facilities. The state agencies are charged a rental rate for the space they occupy, and in return, FERF, or the Facilities Revolving Fund, manages and pays for the operations, maintenance, and debt service, if applicable, on those owned and leased facilities. And then STREAM is responsible for managing and maintaining those properties within FERF. Okay, so if we can move forward to the next slide, we'll go to the capital outlay program for FY22. There you see it. Within general government, this includes 94 projects totaling $495 million. This is both for properties, again, directly managed by General Services or in FERF, and for properties outside of FERF and managed by other properties, or other agencies, I should say. Of the 94 projects, 34 are capital improvement, and that's a value of $212 million. 60 projects are capital maintenance projects, and that totals $283 million. And this is in keeping with the themes we've had the last several years of really trying to invest in capital maintenance projects versus capital improvement projects. We all know it's much more efficient and cost effective to maintain the projects we have versus running them to the end of useful life and just building new. So we've really tried to focus our maintenance dollars to those projects that need it. The increased capital projects budget comes from non-recurring funds that the administration has identified to help address deferred maintenance needs in the real estate portfolio. And finally, no bond funding is being proposed. So if we can move to the next slide. So we'll talk about the Facilities Revolving Fund. On this slide, you'll see some highlights of the capital outlays, again, proposed for Facilities Revolving Fund, or FERF. And so these are some highlights. The first is the War Memorial renovations. It's going to be an upgrade to this building and return it to a fully functioning condition for state government. The proposed State Museum storage building will replace the old Cook Chill building. Many of you, I'm sure, remember that the old Cook Chill building, as it was just starting to get renovated, was taken out by the tornado last March, and it was completely taken down. So we're going to be building that new building at RS Gas, and it's going to be built specifically to make sure that we take care of our state artifacts. We're also requesting funding for the next step of the construction of the Multi-Agency Law Enforcement Training Academy. and that will be for the campus design and infrastructure. We're going to request funds for design and work to renovate Legislative Plaza as well and convert it to functioning space for government. And finally, we're requesting $25 million for our office space reduction plan we are calling Project Tetris. As many members of this committee may remember, when we were here before, we discussed Project Tetris at the last hearing. Lots of employees, of course, went home during COVID, and those agencies that were not already using AWS began using AWS, or if they were using it in one division and not another, they've expanded the use of AWS. So that allows employees to work outside of the traditional office space, and it makes it for happier employees. It certainly aids in our recruitment and retention. I can attest to that. It reduces the use of sick leave, and it keeps customer satisfaction high. It also provides a tremendous opportunity for us in reducing the amount of administrative costs that we have. We have expensive office space, and we can reduce the needs for that. And our agencies have contacted both me and John and other people in our division to talk about reducing that because they want to reduce their rent as well. Clearly pursuing this path is very smart for us in managing the cost of state government, because just keep in mind that real estate is the 5th most expensive thing we do in the state of Tennessee. So if we can make some savings here, then it really has significant effect on our budget. So Stream manages our general government office buildings, as I said before. And while within months they can eliminate a building or move people from a building, they can't necessarily eliminate a building or a lease within months. That takes a little bit longer. But Project Tetris is really going to be a plan for permanently reducing our real estate footprint and producing some significant recurrent savings. We probably won't see those immediately in FY22, but those savings will continue on and compound as time goes on. So before we really get into the details of Project Tetris, let me just set the stage a little bit more. You guys may remember we talked about having a master plan, the first master plan for our real estate in the state of Tennessee. And we started that project back at the end of 2019. You may recall, we talked about it in prior hearings, that our executive committee that was going to be studying that was made up of 3 different groups of people. We had representation from the executive branch, from the judiciary, and also from the legislative branch. And we all worked really hard for about a year on the first phase of the master plan. About midstream, though, you guys know what happened. COVID happened. And so we had to just pause and take a step back and consider how COVID was going to affect our master plan and what we had determined so far. And so there were a lot of factors going on. We had revenue concerns, as all of you know. We also had COVID happening, and we knew that there would be a long-term effect of COVID on our office space. And so we took all that into consideration, and what we really realized is that the first few steps of our master plan, because of all of this, we call it the perfect storm, the way it happened, we could go ahead and implement the first few steps of our master plan, and that's what we're calling Project Tetris, or those first few steps. So I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Commissioner, John Hall, now, and he's going to walk everyone through that so you can kind of see where we are and what our plans are. So, John?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to start with a slide to just talk about our master plan. So the goal we have is to do a master plan for all general government buildings across the state of Tennessee. And what this slide shows is we actually started in Middle Tennessee a little over a year ago. And so in Middle Tennessee area, the Grand Division, we have about 10 million square feet. And in that 10 million square feet, we already had 680,000 or so square feet of vacant space that is there. And so then what we looked at is, well, what's the density of the space itself as we look to the long term? So knowing that we had roughly 22,000 state employees here in Middle Tennessee, we occupy currently about 317 square feet of space per employee. Why is that important? Because as the commissioner noted, AWS helps us a lot. When we AWS a space, we're down to about 250 square feet. When we don't do that, we're well over 400 square feet. So there's a significant difference. And so the next part of this is, what's the estimated cost of that then? So of the 10 million square feet, we have $94 million we're spending annually just on operating expenses. That's utilities and maintenance and things like that. So roughly $9.48 per square foot we're spending. Now, in Middle Tennessee, though, we also have $367 million of deferred maintenance. And you'll see on this slide, it also says that 2/3 of that is in 3 buildings. It's in the James K. Polk building, it's in Legislative Plaza, and it's in the War Memorial building. And so that's why we brought some of those projects forward this particular year. Now, out of that, as the commissioner noted, and through the pandemic for this last year, we all figured out that we could work from home. So we created Project Tetris. So we looked at that 10 million square feet, and the project that we have that we're looking at is on this slide is 4.2 million square feet. And that's in 20 owned buildings and in 10 leases. It's right here in Davidson County. Why? Because those are the big buildings. It's the Tennessee Tower. It's the Andrew Jackson Building. It's all those big buildings where the agencies have told us that they do not need all of the space that they've been occupying. And so we're focusing our Project Tetris on those buildings to save space. When it's done in the next 3 years, we plan to save upwards of 1 million square feet just in that 4 million square feet. We're going to have vacant space still because, you know, agencies change and things change over time of roughly 130,000 square feet. So we're going to reduce our vacant square footage as well. Now, there is a financial impact to that. So we do need funding. So you'll see in the capital project list that there is a project of roughly $26 million to move these agencies around. So as they don't need certain floors in buildings, or we're going to relocate them and move them to a different building. So we have to buy furniture or put up some walls or things like that. And that's what that funding is for. In the end, though, the 10-year benefit of that, what's going to happen to us over time is we think that that's a net gain to the state of $271 million. I just wanted to share one more slide for this. I wanted to just show you what the financial results of this will be. So as I noted, we're going to eliminate state-owned space of 672,000 square feet of space. We're also going to, by doing that, we eliminate the operating expenses for that. So that's a recurring amount of almost $6.5 million just on that space. We're then going to reduce our deferred maintenance by more than $100 million. Much of that is in the James K. Polk building. We're then also going to sell some properties. So Citizens Plaza has been vacant for the last 3 years at this point. So we want to this year go ahead and sell Citizens Plaza. We also have a couple of properties on 2nd Avenue here in town, which is right across the street, frankly, from the ball field. Very valuable property next to Germantown. So it is up for sale currently. So we want to sell that. So those two properties alone, we think, is at least $65 million to the state. Then we also want to eliminate lease space, get out of lease space and bring those people back to state-owned buildings. And so over time, we want to eliminate 260,000 square feet of lease space, which will give us an annual recurring savings of $5.6 million. Just want to show you a quick slide of what we've done over time and what we expect to do in reducing square footage for the state. Which saves us a lot of money. So back in 2011, when we started this process, all the way through 2025, when Tetris is done, we're going to save more than 2 million square feet of state space. And that's on that 10 million square feet that we started with in the end. So 1.4 million of it is owned, and over 750,000 of it is lease space as well. Here's just a slide about capital projects as we're referring to. So this year, FY22 that we are looking at, we have a slide that looks back over time, back to FY15. And so on this slide, we are looking at 94 projects for this year. That's what this is. It's the total number of projects. 34 are improvements and 60 are maintenance. And you'll see that, the blue part are the maintenance projects, which are the ones that we really want to focus on. And you'll see that last year too, and the year before, of how we focused more on maintenance number of projects. And then this slide is dollars for that. So what the capital outlay is for that. So you'll see again, capital maintenance here is $283 million. It's the blue part in FY22, and $212 million of improvements. I may note on this particular slide in the blue section, the maintenance part, the $283 million, $106 million of that is just for the War Memorial building. But by doing War Memorial, that building alone has $74 million of deferred maintenance by itself. So we will eliminate that off of the list. Just wanted to give you a couple of slides just to tell you what's going on in our world as we bid projects these days. So what we're seeing is you'll see over time. So since the last Great Recession, which certainly affected the real estate market way back in 08, 09, you'll see the number of bidders on our projects have continually gone down over time because there's lots of other commercial private sector work going on, especially obviously here in Middle Tennessee. And so you'll see the last uptick this year, we're a little over 3 bidders on average for our project. So it's a little better, I guess, because the private sector market has softened during this past year, certainly with the pandemic. And then this slide shows you the number of successful bids. Now, what a successful bid means to us is we turn in a budget. We obviously have a bid target of what that project is going to cost, and then we add a contingency factor on top of it. So if we're going to build a new building, it's 5%. If we're going to renovate a building, it's 10%. So a successful bid to us is by the time it actually bids, from the time we put in a budget, it's probably more than 2 years later. So if it's successful, that means we got a bid that we can hold in what we call the maximum allowable construction cost, the MAC, which is what our architects are paid off of. So at this point, we've gone way up. We've learned from the market the last couple of years because it really has escalated. Frankly, Middle Tennessee costs were going up 10% a year on average. And so we've had to change what we've looked at in doing that. And so we're up to 84% in successful bids. We like it to be 100%. So when it's not a successful bid, that means we've got to go back to our architect at that point and make changes in the plan of the building. We have to take things out to make it less expensive so that we can sign a contract ultimately.
All right, thank you, John. So I'll conclude the remarks here quickly in the presentation. We'll answer questions that you have. But this last comment I'm going to make is really related to the entire capital budget and the theme that we've carried through for several years now. But some members may have heard me tell this story before, but the very first budget hearing I attended, the governor asked me what the value of deferred maintenance is for all of the properties within the general government portfolio. I did not know that answer. We did not know that answer. We knew some of the value in the facilities revolving fund because we managed that portfolio of real estate. We did not know the entire number for all of general government. And that's because that includes properties that are outside of our jurisdiction. They're actually held by other departments and agencies. So you heard me talk about this last year. We want to do formal conditions assessments on all of our properties in general government, not just those held in facility revolving fund, but all the properties that are held in different departments and in the jurisdiction of other agencies. We got all that done this year. And last year when we talked about this, I said, do not be surprised if the number starts with the letter B. So we have the numbers back. And for the general government portfolio, we have a $2.2 billion deferred maintenance value. So that's a sizable number. And keep in mind that that does not include higher education facilities. Of course, I was here for the hearing earlier and heard that number as well. So it's a lot. And this slide actually shows the 10-year deferred maintenance need as $2.2 billion. Another significant point that I think should be made here is that when we did those facility conditions assessments, excuse me, what we found is what we expected to find is that the properties that are in the facilities revolving fund are much better maintained, are in much better condition, and have a lot less deferred maintenance. And than those properties being held within the jurisdiction of the agencies and departments. And it's understandable, I get that. Their number one focus, those other agencies and departments, is on serving constituents, fulfilling their programs. It's not focused on real estate. My department does focus on real estate. So I think what that says is, the properties in the facilities revolving fund are going to always be maintained better because that, again, is core to what we do. The other thing I wanted to mention, which really follows up on what John was saying, is that we're going to be taking care of a lot of this deferred maintenance. We're going to be taking care of it when we dispose of certain properties. We're going to be taking care of it when we renovate certain properties like War Memorial and Legislative Plaza. So just want to say that we have a lot. It is a massive debt. We have a lot to figure out here. There's a couple of ways to affect deferred maintenance. As I said, you can invest more money. We're requesting an additional $10 million this year. For our facilities investment for deferred maintenance. We are also going to be disposing of properties, but it's a lot, and you either got to pay it now or you got to pay it later. You can run your buildings to the end of useful life and build new, or you can go ahead and start investing now. So the legislature was wise and farsighted in investing monies in the past, but we do have a request for an additional $10 million to add to our deferred maintenance as well. But as John said, War Memorial, $74 million will be removed from the $2.2 billion. We're also going to be investing in Melita. And once we invest in Melita, the properties that are used by Toledo or the Tennessee Department of Corrections, and then also Safety and Homeland Security, those buildings, frankly, are full of deferred maintenance. So once we are able to transfer those properties to a higher and better use and get everyone, that will reduce our deferred maintenance value as well. So it's a big plan, but without such steps, that deferred maintenance number is going to continue to grow. So we have to be aggressive in how we attack it. But frankly, with our facility conditions assessments, our real estate master plan, and Project Tetris, we really have laid the foundation for the next several years of general government strategic real estate decisions and projects. So that concludes our prepared remarks, and we'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Really appreciate you being here today. We do have several questions, and I want to be respectful of your time and the members because we've been in hearing some of us since 9 o'clock this morning. So anyways, that being said, Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. Thank you all for joining us yet again. I want to just dig down a little bit on the reserve funds and some issues related to the rents in Davidson County. We all know that, you know, like construction costs in Middle Tennessee, nothing's getting cheaper in Nashville, and rents continue to go up. They've been increased multiple times in recent years, and there's a FERF reserve balance that was $12.3 million in just as close back as 15-16. And now it's 95.5 million for 1920. So my first question, is there a benefit to having the reserve so high? Why is it here? Why do we need it to be quite so large?
So I will start and I'll let John finish up. There's several reasons that the FERF reserve grows. First of all, there's projects that are in there, right? The money that is for facility revolving fund buildings, that's where the money that is allocated for those projects, that's where it goes. So some of that money is probably obligated on projects, right? So it flows in and it flows out. When there's residual funding there, if a project's finished and we have a residual funding, it's designated to stay in the facility revolving fund. So there's leftover funds that stay in there. We also have disposal of properties. When properties are facility revolving fund properties and those are disposed of, then the sale proceeds go into the facility revolving fund to continue to maintain properties. What else, John? I know there's several other reasons there.
Sure. Some of this will have to actually come from F&A. They help us with that. So as we build that reserve balance, because we're not spending it on other things, they will then use that money on capital maintenance or capital improvement projects. I think over the last year or so, you'd have to ask them, they've just chosen not to come into the FERF reserve to be able to do that, and they've allowed that to build up. Several years ago, I remember hearing that, you should have a higher reserve balance because it was too low. So I think some of that, they'll have to just answer what kind of reserve level that they'd like us to have there.
We'd like you to have the kind you don't have, obviously. If it's low, we want it high. If it's high, no, I'm just teasing. And so my second question, I think you've answered it. If we can anticipate those reserve levels to continue to fluctuate in either direction, depending on decisions made and the pending sale, or we have some properties for sale. So that could conceivably, if that transaction was completed, then it would be in those funds. Okay.
You might also consider debt service, because I know that, for example, our debt service, we've kept it the same budgeted, but debt service, we paid off a lot of debt in the state. And so our debt service has gone down. That's allowed us to accumulate more funds. But the library and archives, of course, project, we have bonds coming on that project. So that will certainly take up some of that reserve once those get issued.
Okay. Back to rental rates in Davidson County. Are you guys looking at additional rate increases for the various departments in the county? And how close are our rates now to like just actual market rates?
Well, I'll give you the general answer and I'll let John do the details. The general answer is yes. I mean, we are seeing rent increases. We just, every year we do a review, and then every third year we actually hire a consultant to come in and do the review just to check everything that we're doing and are evaluating. In Davidson County, we're definitely seeing the rental rates increase. In Shelby County, we've seen an uptick, and then also some in Hamilton County as well. Knoxville has had an uptick, but not as dramatic as the other three. But all the urban areas are definitely seeing an uptick in the rental rates, but frankly, nothing like what we've seen in Davidson County. But John, you might have other details.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we do a market study every year. And so right now, what we look at Class B office space. So Class B office space here in Nashville is about $26.50 a square foot. And so based on building commission policy, they want us to adjust our rates, frankly, every year to be more market competitive and make sure we are. One thing I would note about what the FERF pays for compared to, a normal rental rate. So the facilities revolving fund actually pays for all the furniture. They pay for our state agencies to move, those sorts of things. So the FERF is actually run more efficiently than what you would find in a regular market rent rate to compare apples and apples.
So, and we've talked about this, the AWS and all those solutions and the folks that we have so many people working from home that is evidently in many cases, if not all, proved to be productivity has not been impacted or sometimes maybe impacted positively.
Correct.
And so going forward, we could hopefully expect that to continue to occur. So as departments will then downsize, and I believe it was $27 million you had in there in the FERF fund for what you just said, furniture, relocation, moving these people around as they downsize. But as that happens, what impact is that going to have on your department, both financially? You're not going to be collecting those rents. You could conceivably have more empty space. And how long are departments held? If my department has 1,000 square feet and we move to 500, how long do I have to pay for the 1,000, or does that immediately cut off once I move? Just how does that work?
So I'll let John answer that question, but I will say part of what we're doing with Project Tetris is try to accumulate those vacancies, first of all, on leases. We want to get out of leases. As long as we're all committed to taking care of our state office buildings, we want to get out of leases. And then also to accumulate as many vacancies as we can in those buildings that we need to dispose of. And those are the buildings that have the big deferred maintenance numbers on them. And we mentioned them today. Citizens Plaza has been sitting there for 3 years, and we paid about $1.5 million for it to sit there. We haven't needed it. We don't need it. We need to dispose of it. The Polk building has a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance in it, so that would be another building that we will be disposing of. So the goal, again, is to get out of leases and to create vacancies in those particular buildings we need to get rid of, which is why we're paying for all these different moves. John, if you want to finish up.
Yeah, well, the worst thing we can do is just leave that empty space out there. So our goal here is to move people around. So for instance, I'll just give you an example. So the Department of Education is in the Andrew Johnson building. They have 4 floors. They called us up last summer and said, we can let people work from home, and when they come in, they'll just collaborate. So they said, we can reduce by 2 floors. So we have 2 floors. Now our challenge is to take another agency and put them in that space if we want to keep the Andrew Johnson building long-term, which we do. And so we're going to wind up all of these moves going on around downtown in order to, in the end, get out of a lease or sell a building. And that's how we save the money ultimately. But in the meantime, the way we do that, if an agency vacates a floor, we try to keep this by fiscal year. So they've committed with their budget to pay rent for a fiscal year. So if they move halfway in the fiscal year, we're probably still going to charge them rent for that fiscal year ultimately. But starting the next fiscal year, we won't. So we're under a time pressure here the next couple of years is to make sure that we can get rid of a building, because that's the only way in the end that we actually save money.
Thank you. Just to follow up to the question she had, you said $10 million is what you've asked for capital outlay as it relates to renovation projects. I know there was another $25 million that was going to be moved for renovation somewhere else. So that's $35 million. Why not spend FERF money for that? What's the benefit in doing that? I don't really get that.
Well, again, Chairman, that's probably an F&A question. Our job is to execute the projects as efficiently as possible, but where the funding comes from, they ultimately control those things.
Yeah, I guess the question would be is if we knew we had $96 or $90 million in an account that's there for maintenance, why would we not use the maintenance account instead of using other resources? It just seems like it would make sense.
Well,
Sometimes the simple answer is not the easy one.
Yeah, right. And we do rely on, obviously, the funding in there for different maintenance projects, definitely. But as I was explaining before, part of it is just the money's sitting there, but it's obligated for a project. And sometimes it's just residual funding, but it has built up for the last little while. We will see it come back down, though, as soon as the debt service kicks back in and other things happen. So,
Okay, thank you. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Branson, being here and your staff. You've kind of answered some of the questions, plus you kind of educated me when you came to my district to talk a little bit about the properties, but the excess land and buildings with an estimated value of $117 million plus dollars back in, I believe, October of last year, 2,952 acres, 194 buildings, 3.4 million square feet of space. You've talked about it a little bit, but when will you dispose of the surplus real estate so that it can benefit the state's finance along with local economies and property tax bases?
yeah, so correct. That brings up another question that I was asked the very first hearing I had with the governor. And that question was, assume we have the running inventory of all of our properties. And the truth is we did not. Again, we know what's in the facility revolving fund. We don't know all those properties that are held within the jurisdictions of other departments and agencies, but we are working on that, and we are getting ready to actually present what we call steps to the governor. In steps, John, you'll have to tell me what the acronym stands for. I can't quite recall.
State of Tennessee Excess Property Strategy.
Okay. So another project that we will roll out. So I mentioned the 3 today. We have another one we're going to be rolling out, and we have been working on this diligently, and we have now really good records of all the property that we own in the state of Tennessee. It also includes TDOT right-of-way. So that's the first time we've had that in one central location. So we're going to have that, and what that's going to allow us to do is start identifying properties that we no longer need. The process that we would like to put in place and that we are advocating for is that when the departments come in and present their budgets, we also sit down and go over their properties. And if they do not have a long-term strategic plan for a property and they've had that property for 10 years, it's time for them to let go of that property, let us declare it surplus and get it into a higher, better use, possibly collect taxes on it, or let them work with the local government somewhere to create another amenity for that.
Couple of follow-ups. What does it cost to hold and secure these properties? And I know back home where I am, of course, we got one building is on the registry, and I'm sure we probably gonna keep that. I don't know how we're gonna do that, but what does it cost to just hold and secure some of these properties? In the case like we got back in my district where one is just there, what does it cost to secure those kind of properties?
Well, let me say, first of all, some of those properties, once we get through this process, it is what I said earlier. You know, government and the federal government, we're all famous for this, and that is running properties to the end of their useful life and leaving them there and then building new. And then when I came in here and toured all these different properties, you see a lot of that, unfortunately. And they do become attractive nuisances. So we have to deal with taking some of those properties down. So once we figure out what properties are there and can be declared surplus, we'll figure out how to address some of that. As for what it cost, it's especially with the building on a historic registry. I mean, you and I have toured that building over there. For example, in Knoxville, it had that same kind of mental health institute, and it ended up being a private funded and the city funded project to renovate at Lakeshore Park. But it is a cost to us, and I'm sure John can answer with more details about those costs.
Yeah, it gets back to that annual operating expenses, so if it's purely vacant and we shutter the building, sure, we'd like to turn off the utilities, but you really can't turn everything off or it'll deteriorate quickly. So there's always some level of utilities and maintenance that you should do on the buildings, or the roof starts leaking or other things. So, think back to that $9.48. It may not be quite that high for a building that's completely vacant, but I'll give you a number. Citizens Plaza has been sitting there for the last 3 years. We've spent on average about $1.4 million a year each year just to have a vacant building. Just to make sure the light and the heat and the air and the maintenance is going on. So it's time to sell that particular building.
Well, you just answered part of my question. What is the plans for Citizen Plaza?
Yes, sir. We have,
going forward?
yeah, we have one final tenant in the building. It's the Arts Commission.
Mhm.
And so we're going to move them up to the Rachel Jackson Building to the first floor. So that's a capital project for us this year that we're going to move forward with. And then sometime mid-year and beyond, we're going to sell this building for Citizens Plaza.
Okay. One final quick question, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna go back to my district. We got some buildings that probably can be salvaged. Would the state sell them to the local government or give them to local government? What would happen in a case where you got buildings like might be usable? Say the local government will fix it up if you let them have it. Is that something?
Well, that's similar to the example that I just provided at the city of Knoxville. That's what Knoxville did with their, I guess, their crown jewel building, just as the West Tennessee Mental Health Institute had. The city of Knoxville came in and renovated that building, and the state worked with them to do that. Actually, John, I was at the city, and John was actually at the state at that time. And we worked on that, and we got it funded, and the building was to be able to be restored. And it worked out very well. So that's a situation where it can work and benefit all parties. The state did not need the facility any longer or the office space, and so the city took it over.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I had a couple quick questions. We've talked about the $6 million in design planning for Legislative Plaza, old Legislative Plaza. Some of us have been around. We love that place, even the mold. But what is the purpose of the $6 million there? I know it's for design, but who do you hope to put there?
Well, we've talked about this. Go ahead, John.
Sure. Well, no offices, that someone will be there every day. So the thought is probably more conference space, things like that, touchdown space. So think of people AWSing a lot, and I need to come in town and come to hearings or other things on Capitol Hill.
Mhm.
Then they would have a place to come to.
And
So-
and the reason for making it that flex space is because of how it's constructed and the environmental challenges, I guess you could say, of the space.
Yes, sir. Plus, we, as we said, we don't need lots of other office space in town. So we certainly didn't need to put offices back underground again at Legislative Plaza. But it has a purpose being there, and we think it is important. We're also thinking maybe a visitor center. That's been talked about. And so that's why we want an extended time to design it and get lots of input as to what it should become.
Yeah. What about the $106 million you want for Legislative Plaza?
Well, that's for the War
I
Memorial.
mean, I'm sorry, the War Memorial.
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, that's for the War Memorial Building. So I think we had said in another hearing, the plan is to renovate that. It's a historic structure. It's on the registry. And so we would like to remove the Attorney General's office that's currently in a lease at the UBS building, move them back down the street, and long-term then they would be in the War Memorial Building as their offices.
Obviously, maybe I should ask the state architect this question, but why would you move the Attorney General's office there when you've got Legislative Plaza here and the Attorney General's office is right beside of it? I guess the reason why we originally moved here is because we thought it was too cost prohibitive in order to renovate that building, but now we're going to go spend $106 million. I really don't get that. So tell me why the streamed reason for doing that, I guess, would be.
To renovate War Memorial?
Yes.
Well, it's a historic building.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I think it's the front door of the Capitol in a sense, so we wanted to make sure that we protect it. The War Memorial, the museum would be renovated, and then we're also going to be upgrading all the systems in the theater, the War Memorial Auditorium, I'm sorry, yes. So.
Yeah, I guess my reason for asking that question is it sounds to me that space, and I recognize, Commissioner, that this predates you, but I recognize that space lends itself more for legislative duties there than it would this space. And we moved this space here with the idea, if we knew there was such a great demand to move Attorney General's offices back downtown and to get out of UBS, because we've been talking about this for the same 10 years I've been here. Sure. Why didn't we talk about moving the Attorney General's office here instead of doing that over there?
Sure. Well, the Attorney General's office that's in the UBS building was in this building before they went there. So they left here because this building needed renovated ultimately. And it was at that time that I just recall, the legislature just decided to come over here. Now the legislature space grew. by quite a bit when it left War Memorial and Legislative Plaza and came to the Courthouse Hall building.
It did grow. I think it grew by double, but we also, the other additional third to that was having the comptroller's offices here, which we didn't have over across the way.
Yes, sir.
I've got a couple other questions, but Representative Miller's getting antsy in his pants. I'm headed to him. Go ahead,
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Miller.
Chairman. I know we're actually running out of time, and you all can get this answer back at a later date. But Mr. Hall, several years ago in Shelby County, we sold the state building. I'd like to know how that worked out for us.
Yeah, the Donnelly J. Hill building?
Yes.
Yes.
And second question is the number of state employees that are in Shelby County, the number of state buildings that they are housed in versus the ones that we're renting from the county or the city. Just would like to have that information.
The number.
Yes.
Okay, we
Number of
can get
state
that to you.
employees,
Yeah.
the number of state buildings,
Sure.
and just want to see how that's working in Shelby County.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Thank you guys for coming today. I had a couple other questions, but I'll send an email to you because I realize that we are we've already run out of time. I can't see that clock back there anyways. Yeah, but Commissioner, I really appreciate you and your staff, the hard work that you're doing. You have and your team have come a long way since
Thank
you
you.
walked in the door, and it's to be commended. I would love to talk to Mr. Hull off the record about my thoughts about the number of bidders, but I'll save that for another time. But I really appreciate your all's hard work and diligence for the people of the state and making it way more productive than it was when I came over a decade ago. But
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We are back in session. Is there any other business before the committee? Seeing none, I move to adjourn.